On March 4th, the MCU will debut its return of Daredevil. Considered a B-level Marvel character, he's been given few adaptations outside of its known portrayals, in comparison to its large and enriched comic book series running for more than 60 years. Hundreds of comics exploring the character's perspective on justice at the street level of Hell's Kitchen in New York City, and his participation in the larger Marvel universe, teaming up with characters like Spider-Man, the Punisher, Black Widow, Captain America, and he was even lent to a graphic novel to team up with Batman. The first comic was released in April 1964, introducing us to the Man Without Fear, a blind lawyer by day, crime-fighting vigilante by night. The Daredevil's powers come from a chemical accident when he was just a boy, causing his blindness but enhancing his other senses, as well as granting him a sonar-like sense like that of a dolphin or a bat. This allows him to have a vision in his mind of his surroundings. He is also an expert fighter, and he uses a modified billy club that extends into a bow staff, can have a massive cable and grappling hook, or split into two separate wielding batons. And let's not even get into how cool the suit looks. You would think with this large catalog of a series and an intriguing character design, there would be more of him portrayed on the big screen, but you will find his live-action representation is rather scarce, with only 3 portrayals on his record. The first time we get to see Daredevil portrayed on the screen is in the original sci-fi series The Incredible Hulk, for the TV movie The Trial of the Incredible Hulk, released in 1989. Funny enough, Matt Murdock is David Banner's lawyer assigned to represent him, and the film sees them teaming up against Wilson Fisk. This was supposed to be a backdoor pilot as a potential spin-off for the Daredevil character, but nothing ever came of it. Oddly enough, this is also the first Stan Lee cameo ever. Before the MCU was even a thought, Stan Lee pops up in the long-running Incredible Hulk saga as the jury foreman. It's an interesting little Marvel detail for you. But in this, Daredevil sports the black bodysuit attire. However, there is no depiction of this in the comics at this point. The first time we'd see Daredevil in this ensemble isn't until 1993 for the miniseries Daredevil the Man Without Fear, written by Frank Miller. The depiction of the black attire is meant to show what it's like for Matt in his early days as a vigilante, prowling the streets like a ninja. Mostly shown as sweats and torn cloth, it would be a suit that is loved most by fans and the reason why they also used it in the first season of the most recent adaptation. But the first to wear the black spandex was Rex Smith, and it's likely the inspiration for the comic which inspired the first costume portrayed in the hit Netflix series, Marvel's Daredevil. Netflix became a beacon for a grittier take on the MCU, from a perspective of what goes on at the street level in this universe. As an undefined part of Phase 3, taking place before Civil War but after the events in New York in the first Avengers, the Netflix Daredevil series would kick off what is considered the Defenders Saga, a collection of 5 shows including Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, Iron Fist, and The Punisher. 4 of these shows will lead into the 6th Defenders series, showing us all of these characters teaming up for a joint cause. Daredevil would be at the heart of this team-up, as his portrayal was that of the leader of this group. The only one left out of this team-up would be the Punisher, though we never saw a future where that might have changed for the Defenders series, as Marvel shifted their focus after dedicating 4 years to building and creating these shows. They were all individually cancelled, and everyone thought they would never see Daredevil ever again. However, the popularity of the character hit new heights with the success of this series, and a movement was started to bring it back. Calling itself #SaveDaredevil, diehard fans around the world rallied to get Marvel Studios to get Daredevil back and continue this portrayal, because it truly is the best one yet. The Daredevil show held these other shows together, and fans knew we weren't going to see the last of Matt Murdock in the MCU. We would all eventually get our wish as of 2021, with a small cameo in the film Spider-Man No Way Home it was officially announced to the world that Daredevil was officially coming back, and it would still be represented by Charlie Cox, the same actor who played him in the Netflix original series. He then gets a bit of a longer role in the She-Hulk series, and soon he will be getting the newest entry in the Daredevil adaptation timeline as an official part of the MCU Phase 5. So that's the first and the most recent portrayal of the character on the main stage. But what about the one that's right in the middle? Well, it's safe to say not a lot of people like talking about that one, and it's for good reason. We are of course talking about Daredevil, starring Ben Affleck from 2003. Written and directed by Mark Steven Johnson, whose first directorial credit was Simon Birch, but he would go on to write and direct the Nicolas Cage-led Ghost Rider adaptation. But these are his only 2 director credits as part of a comic book film, though he was also credited as the executive producer for the 2011 Ghost Rider sequel and the 2005 Elektra spin-off film. But the story doesn't start there, because he wasn't the first director attached to this project. The idea to adapt Daredevil starts in 1997, with Chris Columbus attached to write and direct. Columbus had plenty under his belt at this point: Home Alone 2, Only the Lonely, Mrs. Doubtfire, Adventures in Babysitting, and he was also the writer for films including The Goonies and Gremlins. None of this really screams comic book background, but there's no denying that he can make a film successful, since he would also go on to do plenty of other great films, including the first 2 entries in the Harry Potter series. But soon, 1998 rolls around, and Marvel is facing bankruptcy, and while this attempt was originally being backed by 20th Century Fox, that deal had expired before final decisions were made. Then, Marvel had Columbia Pictures lined up to get this film going. Columbus had been working on the script with a fellow writer when they would pass it along to Johnson to take over. Marvel and Columbia fight over the digital rights of the film, eventually leading to Columbia then canceling the film. Not long after, New Regency comes in and picks up the production, while Fox comes back in for distribution, since 2000 is the year of the first X-Men film, which was a commercial and a financial success. It's no wonder Fox wanted to get back in the comic book film hype. Blade had come out in '98, kickstarting the rebirth of films based on comic books and basically saving Marvel. These were now 2 proofs of concepts, so a push was imminent for more comic book movies. Johnson took the original script and did his own revisions on it, then he gave it to Marvel in 2001. It was then praised by Marvel executive Kevin Feige for being one of the strongest scripts for this character that they had reviewed thus far. After some squabbling over set locations, filming begins in March of 2002. Spider-Man is released later that year and is a blockbuster hit, allowing Fox to issue a larger budget to the production of Daredevil. Johnson took a lot of influence from the Daredevil comics. For example, Volume 2 of the original series, specifically the issue Guardian Daredevil Part 3 Dystopia, the cover is directly visualized in the very first scene of the film, with Daredevil on the church cross. This scene would also be depicted slightly in Netflix's Daredevil, showing Matt sitting at the top of a church holding the cross, though at that point he's wearing the black attire, so it's a little different. Johnson really loved the artwork and the story of this part of the series, written of course by Kevin Smith, with the art being done by Joe Quesada. They would literally take out a scene from the comic book that Joe did. He wanted to model as many direct scenes as he could, and he wanted it to be as accurate as possible. On set, Affleck would wear deep, murky blue contacts to imitate being blind, but it also obstructed his vision on set, so he struggled with bumping into things. The representation of the world Matt sees is what they refer to as the Shadow World, where in the series it's described as a world on fire. The comics show the sense as a legitimate radar-styled grid, almost like a computer generation in his mind that shows his surroundings. So neither depiction of this vision is comic accurate, but it's about style, and I don't think there's anything wrong with the Shadow World style over the world on fire. They are both equally cool and interesting. They took sound very seriously for the film as well, because a lot of that sonar-style effect is contingent on the sound vibration, which it seems they went through great lengths to show us as realistically as possible. The scenes where louder than normal noises throw Matt off balance, while the sound of rain basically gives Matt excellent vision. Even the cryo-esque bed he sleeps in to submerge himself in water is due to the concept of his inability to block out excess sound in the world. So the water helps him sleep. The official score for the film is composed by Greme Ravel, who has been composing for films since the 90s. The soundtrack itself is a mix of alternative and grunge rock popular in the early 2000s. Evanescence, Fuel, Seether, Rob Zombie, and many others.
How can you see into my eyes like open doors?
Everything was lining up perfectly, but as is the tragic story of many productions, the studios backing your ideas will find ways to meddle in the process. Apparently, the film was leaning towards an R rating, but the studio did not like that and needed them to make it a PG-13, which turned out to be the release that we all received. This is why the film seems off balance. There is an awkward shift in the tone the movie builds up to for different portions, making the film seem incoherent a lot of the time, almost as if it's two completely different movies, looking at the infamous playground fight and how ridiculous that is, and then a few minutes later jumping into the brutal rooftop sequence with the death of Elektra. There is just something wrong with how this comes off. Tonally, it is not a good mix, and the playground fight was a reshoot to add a little more comedy and build up more of the romance to the film's plot. This could likely be due to the success of Spider-Man earlier that year, and the high-level executives basically going, "Do that," and Johnson basically having his hands tied. So they pushed out and cut and reshot and did what they needed to do, and they got the PG-13 rating. Marketing for the film included a spot for the trailer during the second half of Super Bowl 37, and the film was officially released on Valentine's Day 2003. On a $78 million budget, the film brought in $179 million. Nothing to be shy about, but it's the start of the comic book movie era as we know it today. Daredevil was the fifth major Marvel film in this string of adaptations. 5 films over 5 years, and Daredevil seems to be the worst of the bunch. This film almost put a nail in the coffin for the Daredevil character. Reviews ranged from general distaste for the concept of the superhero origin story, and others that just disliked the film altogether. Critics called it sloppy, second-rate, a pretender in the realm of bona fide superheroes. Not woeful, not wonderful, merely watchable. Ben Affleck won a Golden Raspberry for Worst Actor. Daredevil is not remembered for its glory, but for its blunders. Johnson said years later, quote, "Looking back on it, one of the mistakes I made with the film was wanting to put everything in. I wanted to do Daredevil's origin story, and I wanted to do the Elektra saga, and I wanted to introduce Bullseye and Foggy. I wanted everything to be in there, but the film could only support so much. And then when you're told to cut a half hour out and make it more of a love story, things start to feel rushed and not quite right. It's a fan thing. When you love something so much, you want to tell it all. Everything seemed to add up to success, but then it just didn't. Oh, and that half hour he's talking about? It wasn't until 2008, when a director's cut is released, where we learned what this part of the story actually was, containing an entire subplot not included in the original theoretic film, going from 1 hour and 43 minutes to a 2 hour and 13-minute runtime with a vast amount of differences. There is an entire portion that focuses more on Matt and Foggy as actual lawyers, and portrays more of the darker tone they were trying to set. Scenes are extended or flat out changed, and some for the better. There is a scene where Matt and Elektra are on the roof, where Matt tells her about the rain, seeing her face for the first time. The original cut leads into a lovemaking scene where Matt gets the invitation to the party he attends later on. The director's cut sees this scene being changed dramatically, as instead it is left as the original plot point where he gets the invite from his secretary, Karen Page, and the rooftop scene actually sees him leave Elektra there, to then lead into the alley scene where Matt beats up a kingpin thug in front of his child. Swapping when these scenes happen shifts the perspective of how Matt is handling the events taking place. Even Karen Page has a bigger part to play in the subplot. Kevin Feige stated, quote, "The people who had other opinions of Daredevil will be won over by this version." Danny Graydon, a film reviewer for Empire, said, quote, "A considerable improvement on the original version, notably preferring the more violent undertones and lesser focus on the romance, and the equal focus of Daredevil and his lawyer alias, Matt Murdock. Anyone who has seen it has agreed. This is the cut that should have originally been released." Plans for a sequel were squashed fairly soon after, especially when Affleck stated he would never play the character again. The spin-off for Elektra is released in 2005, and then that flops even harder. Affleck is meant to have a cameo, but the scene was cut completely. It would be 12 years until we get Daredevil back, and the fan base is happy again. But we shouldn't forget our roots. Daredevil was a flawed film, but it was a victim to the unfortunate reality many films face: the strong hand of the money machine coming down on the creative process, hindering the ability for a director to take his vision to where it should go. Daredevil is not the only film to be a target of this routine. Many films have not fared well in the light of those pulling the strings to get a film made, but it is one of the first blunders for the Marvel world. And the most unfortunate thing about it is there was a completely different version. Right there. A version fans would have loved. A version worthy enough to be held up as a Daredevil film to be celebrated rather than ridiculed. But that's just part of the process. If it wasn't for this film to fail, who knows if the Netflix version would have even been considered? Perhaps the stepping stones set by a film like Daredevil and the others should be revered. Foundation builders for what comic book movies are today. It's upsetting that it would take a director's cut to show us this, and to show us that the 2003 Daredevil we got could have been so much more. But seeing that original vision finally shows you that they really had something else planned, and that should be enough. But that playground fight, that's still just horrible.
You're holding back.
Yes.
Don't.